This conference will now be recorded.
Thanks, Brian. All right, it's 1:34. I'm going to call the meeting to order, and we're going to open it up with public comments. Any members of the public, this is your time. All right, hearing none, we'll go ahead and I'll request an approval of the meeting minutes. We provided you with those from the December 21st meeting. Would anyone like to make a resolution to approve the minutes? Make a motion, that is.
This is Lonnie, so moved.
All right, and is there a second? I'll second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
John, it looks like you're saying aye. We still can't hear you, sorry. Any nays? Abstentions? All
I'll
right, so
abstain.
moved.
I was not on the joint committee yet, so I'll abstain.
All right, great. So we have an abstention from Hank. Thank you so much. All right, you can take me over to the next slide, Brian. All right, so we're going to get an update on the legislative session from Hank Webster, Brian Fernan, and James DeSantos. Turn it over to you, gentlemen.
Thank you. So I'll just briefly run through this, and first let me start by saying it's nice to virtually meet some of you that I have not met yet. I just started as the deputy commissioner back in February for the energy branch at Deep, so I'm really enjoying getting to dive into all these new experiences and look forward to working with you all. So just briefly, I'll run through some of the legislation that I think has some interactions with the work that this group does. So obviously SB 7 is a gigantic bill that is both encompassing a lot of policy area and is generating a lot of headlines in the news. For today's purposes, I just wanted to focus on a couple of sections. One was section 24, which was a deep proposal that was another piece of legislation which directs PURA to develop low-income discount rates for gas and water companies, so that will match what's going on the electric side now. So we're excited about that, and we think that's going to help a lot of Connecticut residents. And then also Section 27 and Section 40, I kind of pair those together because they both deal with advancing the presence of methane detectors inside of buildings in the state of Connecticut. So one is allowing PURA to direct gas company fines to support the study and installation of those methane detectors in homes. And then Section 40 is having the state Codes and Standards Committee and the state building inspector to study the inclusion of gas detectors within the code itself. And this is a really important issue, as I'm sure you all understand. We detect for carbon monoxide leaks, which can be deadly. This would be also detecting for methane leaks, which, as they build up, can become certainly very dangerous to homes and quite catastrophic. The next legislation I just wanted to touch on that passed was 6853. That was an act concerning funding for microgrids resilience and state agency building decarbonization projects. So, the critical piece here, I think, for our purposes, is that it allows state agencies to continue to use on-bill financing for greener gov projects. So, again, looking at the opportunities to lead by example within state government to make sure we're reducing our own carbon footprint. This is a critically important piece of that puzzle, and we're glad to see that the use of that financing mechanism is no longer at risk and will be continuing moving forward. There were also a couple of pieces of critical legislation that did not pass that I just wanted to touch on really quickly. So SB 1145, that was an update to the Global Warming Solutions Act to make our state sort of look more like our neighbors in terms of the efforts going on with greenhouse gas emissions reduction. It would have updated our 2050 target to net zero emissions. It would have established subsector targets for each of the emissions generating sectors within the economy, things that we track throughout the greenhouse gas inventory. But this would have established actual targets to continue to drive down emissions across the board. And this goes to the old adage that you can't manage what you don't measure. And so setting those targets would have, I think, been a critical piece. There's obviously lots of things we can do still, but we were disappointed to not see that move forward. And then finally, it also would have provided the Commissioner of DEEP the opportunity to, or the empowerment to propose regulations specifically directed at greenhouse gas emissions. And, you all can understand how that would help in the fight against greenhouse gas emissions. Another piece of legislation that did not pass in full, but pieces did, was SB 979. That was a governor's bill. So that had two primary components. One was to develop urban tree canopy within our cities, which is a critically important way to manage urban heat island effect and obviously deliver a whole host of other benefits into communities. That part did survive and found its way through in another piece of legislation. The other piece of 979 that did not find its way across the line was the establishment of home energy labels, which again we think is another way to help measure the problem, help give renters especially some insights into what the energy consumption would be in a particular property that they are looking to rent. So the fight will continue, and we will continue to push to make sure that Connecticut residents are able to thrive and fully understand what the carbon impacts are and the energy burdens are. But those are just some of the quick updates that I wanted to throw on the table, and obviously turn it over to Brian and James. Thank you.
No, I don't think we can top that. No, I think James, maybe we can give a little quick update on the healthy school bill that didn't pass. That would have brought, I think, potentially a lot of potential activity to both boards. But yeah, nothing really much more to add than that.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And Hank, thank you for walking through those. Those are perfect. And unfortunately, the bill that Brian referenced is a bill that has to end up in the did not pass column. So that is Senate Bill 961 that would have allocated, would have been a bonding allocation of $25 million to the Green Bank to promote zero carbon schools in the state of Connecticut. It would have required the Green Bank to facilitate energy audits at over 1,000 schools and solar feasibility studies for the incorporation of solar PV systems on new roofs or infrastructure upgrades. Unfortunately, it did not pass due to the fact that it was not either in the budget or in a bond package. It did pass the Senate on the consent calendar, but then was held up in the House. So that's where it tragically ended.
And I would just add, that wasn't our bill. It was a bill that we were like flattered to have to kind of encourage us to play this role. And it was at first, had everything you could ever possibly imagine in there. And we tried to say, hey, this is nice, but we thought we got it to a place where it was manageable and something that we could actually operationalize. But it's always in a weird spot when it's not your legislation and you're not trying to, you don't want to own it, but at the same time you want to be supportive. It's like this weird dance you're kind of stuck in.
Yeah, no, it was a proposal by the Roundtable on Climate and Jobs, which is being led by Aziz Deacon and Allison Pilcher, and they did a fantastic job shepherding it through the process. It's just at the end of the day, the financing just was not there to push it across the finish line.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments for Hank, Brian, or James?
Hi, this is John Harity. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can. Thank you.
I had to change computers. I don't know what was wrong with the other one, but um, anyways, well, we were disappointed. The roundtable did initiate the school bill, and it was disappointing that it didn't pass. But beyond that, it was disappointing in this way, in terms of the session that we had the Democrats who, not to be political, but you would expect would be more supportive of climate change initiatives, uh, with the firm control of both houses and the executive branch. The state had so much money that it was giving it back uh, to taxpayers, and we have a very popular a governor and lieutenant governor, all things considered, as popular as any politician can be. So you would think that if there was a year when we would be able to make gains on climate change legislation, it would have been this year, but there really was not much of an agenda. And I think we have to really look at that and look at ways that we can move the ball seriously forward here. So that would be my comment. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Any other comments or questions? Okay, hearing none. I'm
I'm
gonna
sorry,
move
this is
on.
Melissa. I have
Oh,
one.
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
Yep.
I just want to know how we can support these efforts, these legislative efforts, because the governor, has a vision and proposed some really great legislation that didn't make it through. And I'm just wondering if there's a way that, is there something we can help with or some strategy that's being recalibrated or, what's the idea going forward with stuff?
Melissa, this is Brian, just a clarification. Do you mean we as a joint committee, we as individual organizations in these efforts, meaning like all the things that were just talked about, or one specifically?
Well, I'm focused on buildings, but in general, I would say both of those, both as as members of the Energy Efficiency Board and the Green Bank, and also, as individual, representatives of other organizations. What is, I mean, I think this is a statewide vision, so I don't see any conflict of interest of like supporting um, the governor's initiatives. I guess I'm just wondering because it was such a, not a complete failure, but there was just a lot that didn't get done that we expected would get done. Like, what is the other question I guess I have is about the process of devising legislation. It's like right now that we have the opportunity to be involved or help in some way to craft legislation early enough so we can start talking to legislators about it early. And I think this last session in particular, it just felt like the legislation came out so late that it was really hard to build momentum around it because the bills came out very, very late in the process.
So just a couple of thoughts, and we'll turn it to colleagues on devising legislation. I believe it's the December meeting of the Joint Committee where we ask respective members to indicate any legislative proposals they're thinking about going into the next legislative session. That might be a good place to think about support. We do have a meeting in September, so maybe we think about those timelines jointly, September and December. So just kind of throwing those dates out. Up to this point, it's been what's likely to be introduced in session, December meeting, June meeting, what happened as a result of session, report out those two timelines in terms of our general joint committee objectives. In terms of like the joint committee in general, we have not had a policy or any direction in terms of submitting support from a joint committee to a legislative proposal. We haven't had that. We could talk about it as you all would like. You're the board members of each respective group. And then, you know, with regards to the Green Bank, we have our processes. Happy to have James or Brian talk about that if it's necessary, as I would assume DEEP and the utilities would have their processes too in terms of legislation. But it's generally been like report out and what's coming.
I can offer some very universal thoughts, you know, and they're not going to be very satisfactory, but I think it always comes back to education and having those conversations, and you know, particularly with any audience you need to move, including legislators, and you know, just thinking about, you know, this in a you know, with regard, say, to the schools bill. You know, a couple of weeks ago, the Mansfield Elementary Net Zero School had its opening and ribbon cutting, and it was very inspiring. And I think, you know, through talking with them, it was very eye opening about how they combined 3 elementary schools into one. How the school district's going to be saving, I think, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on their energy costs moving forward, and how it's just like an overall better experience and better asset for the community. And so, you know, if we can just, I think, get more of that information, more of these positive stories about the work that we're trying to do across buildings, across transportation, across everything, you know, it continues to help with that discussion. So, you know, I'm always an advocate for getting those conversations with legislators started as soon as possible, especially, you know, following a somewhat challenging session.
This is Lonnie, and just throwing this in here, this is something when I chaired the Energy Committee years ago. I always ask for a real world autopsy of why bills fail. Before you begin the next session, you really have to have a real world autopsy. You know, like the representative from Derby hated it because it was not going to give his school what Seymour was going to, you know, that you have to really get down and dirty with this stuff to kind of really get an understanding of what it is. So the idealism is great and get all the big, you know, picture points out there, but also get a real sense of, you know, where the pushback came from in real terms, and then get in early to combat that. If you want to take it out, you know, in the next session. And I think also, you know, I think sometimes we get a little whiny because it didn't pass in the first session, but that's these big ideas. It takes a while sometimes. I mean, look like, you know, the early voting. How many years did that take? You know, so just stay with the program, but also find out why it really failed as opposed to, you know, conceptually, you know, the real world barricades to it.
Thank you, Lonnie and Hank. I actually, you guys echoed exactly what I was going to recommend is more education and understanding who had issues with it, who on the policy making side had issues with it, or voting side. So Brian, you were going to go ahead and say something.
I was just going to follow up Deputy Commissioner Webster's comment on Manchester schools. That project came through Solar Map, our marketplace assistance program, which is a voluntary program for municipalities to say that they need kind of soup to nuts support for solar on their rooftops. And as you saw, what a fantastic project. I saw the drone footage of that installation, and it's just fantastic. And we all know the economics are there to save those schools money. It's a matter of, to your point, Hank, getting the education out there. And then within the context of the NRES, the non-residential energy solutions program, supporting those cities and towns in competing.
Hey, Brenda, this is Ron Aruccio. May I add something to this discussion?
Of course, please.
Sure. Just a couple of things, just for Melissa's benefit, with regard to the school bill, Senate Bill 961. There was some behind the scenes work on that. I know I had reached out to the Green Bank and we had discussed some of the wording within that bill. And then there was also a discussion with the Connecticut climate change, climate and workforce group to actually go over some of the potential wording which would make that bill work well, and I was very supportive of the final work product there. So I thought that was a great example of how the Energy Efficiency Board representatives, Eversource, and the Green Bank worked together to make a real good working product. And then the second item, just to, Brian, you were mentioning about the Manchester school and the work with solar, just to, we're in the process of finalizing a case study on the Manchester schools as well as one of the first net zero energy schools. So I think there'll be something forthcoming on that very shortly. The idea is to try to have that ready for the EEB annual planning meeting.
Excellent. And just a clarification, I think Mackie was sending me notes there. Hank, I think you were referring to Mansfield. I was mentioning Manchester, but thank you, Ron, for that further elaboration there. It's great.
I had one other comment if we have time. This is John Harity. We're talking with legislators now. You know, there are some caucuses within the legislature, like there's a manufacturing caucus. And we believe, the roundtable believes that there ought to be a climate change caucus, people that are particularly interested in this subject and might be the most advanced in terms of creating and supporting an agenda. And so we're talking with legislators about that now, and we think that will be helpful.
That's excellent. That's an excellent update. Thank you, John. Love to hear more about that as it materializes. All right, so let's move on to agenda item number 5.
Okay, so this is that time of year in June where the Green Bank does its next fiscal year report out, where we're currently in the planning process. Our Budget Operations and Compensation Committee, which John Harity chairs, usually meets several times, late May, early June. We have done that. A presentation of the budget, the targets for our programs, and the investments are presented. We hash those out, and then a recommendation for review and approval of those targets, budget, and investment are brought to the Board of Directors, which is happening this Friday, June 23rd. So the Budget Operations and Compensation Committee will be making that recommendation to approve of the proposed budget targets and investments. So that's at a high level. In July is when we put forth the red line or revised comprehensive plan. Per our statute, CGS 245N, we're required to have a comprehensive plan that syncs up with the budget and targets. So we will be bringing that plan to the board on July 21st. A couple of things, and we're still working on this, that will be within that plan as red lines, is that the residential solar investment program is now over. At least the front end of it, which is to achieve the 350 megawatt target. We ultimately delivered 378 megawatts. So we provided a final report to the Energy and Technology Committee, which was accompanied by an independent evaluation of the program. So that closed down the target portion of that program, but we left open the cost recovery. So there's another element of that program, which is about how the systems perform. As they perform, they generate renewable energy credits. The renewable energy credits are sold to our colleagues at the EDCs for their Class 1 RPS compliance. As we sell those, as we aggregate and sell those RECs to the EDCs over time, that helps us cost recover the incentives that we put out up front and the administrative and financing costs of the program. So we'll be in this monitoring performance for the next 10 to 15 years on that program to cost recover it over time. Energy storage solutions is our next priority per Public Act 2153. There was a 1,000 megawatt energy storage target set. Docket 171203 RE03 established a 580 megawatt battery storage program that's co-administered by the EDCs, Eversource and UI, and the Connecticut Green Bank. That's split into 290 megawatts for residential and 290 megawatts for non-residential. PURA also established a Justice 40 target that no less than 40% of the installation shall be in the low income and disadvantaged communities sector for the residential projects. So we're currently at about 50 megawatts of approved projects through energy storage solutions. A majority of those, about 47, 48 megawatts, are in the non-residential space, that is commercial and industrial projects, and about 2 megawatts are in the residential space. So we're behind on residential, we're ahead on non-residential, but we're going to continue to focus on those targets with our utility colleagues. The Residential Renewable Energy Solutions Program that's administered by the EDCs, there's a really exciting element of that program as a result of Public Act 21-48, Section 2. Affordable housing was deemed single family and therefore eligible for the Residential Renewable Energy Solutions Program. The Department of Housing, Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, DEEP, and the Green Bank have been working really hard since the passage of that policy. As I've told my team back in 2021, when we did this kind of report out like we did today, I said that this is going to be the most important bill that we will look back on because it will have opened up the market for clean energy and affordable housing. So that process worked itself through a PURA docket. I think it's 220802 or 210802 docket. Really good rulings from PURA, and we're now continuing to work with our state colleagues as well as HUD to ensure that we can bring clean energy to the tenants within those affordable housing units to deliver them economic and other benefits. And Mackie Dykes on our team is leading the charge there, which is great. Environmental infrastructure, our scope expansion, that also happened in 2021. That was Public Act 21-115. So we're continuing to integrate the expansion of our scope beyond clean energy, which includes things like climate adaptation and resilience, land conservation, parks and recreation, agriculture, water, waste and recycling, and a number of other things. So we just hired our Director of Environmental Infrastructure. She is now out on maternity leave. She will be arriving in late September, early October. But we're also working to expand our existing product line, the Smarty Loan, which all of you are aware of. In 2024 will likely be available to those homeowners that want to do, water measures, climate adaptation and resilience measures. They will be able to use the Smarty Loan for other things. The CPACE program also expanded in 2020, last year actually, to include resilience. So our team was working really hard there to include resilience alongside our clean energy projects. So these are the areas that we'll be focusing in on. We've got targets and tasks on for FY24. Obviously, we're all really, really excited about a number of different things, whether it's the IIJA, BIL, or the IRA. I can tell you that the Green Bank team, when we saw the August of last year, the signing of the IRA, that we got our team together. We looked at our comprehensive plan for FY23 and we said, what would happen if we dreamt bigger, if we thought about greater deployment using the Inflation Reduction Act? Our team put together some concepts and a plan, presented it to the board in January, and it expanded our staffing ability so that we could ramp up now to realize the benefits of the Inflation Reduction Act. And Alex Kovtunenko is going to talk a little bit about that later on in the agenda, some of the exciting things going on there. So we really see that component of the tax credits and the adders as really, really a big opportunity for Connecticut. The DOE Loan Program Office has its state energy financing institutions capabilities. This is the green bank element of support from the Department of Energy. We have been in conversations with the DOE LPO SEFI program. SEFI is the shorthand acronym. They would like Connecticut, New York, other states to serve as gateways to enable the LPO to provide low-cost capital to commercially available technologies. Happy to go into some details on what the LPO supports, but in the context of working with states, they can provide low-cost federal funding for commercially available technologies. And then, of course, the EPA Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, that's our #1 priority in the Inflation Reduction Act. I'll talk about that in a second. And then as the EEB went through its transition, I think last year and the year before, we're going through some new integrations. As the Deputy Commissioner noted earlier, he will be taking Vicki Hackett's position on the board of the Green Bank. Deputy Commissioner Hodeling at DECD will be taking Banu Chandi's place on the board. And Mayor Hoydick has resigned from the board. So we're going to be filling in that position at some point, working with Representative to make that appointment. So those are some of the things we're pulling together for the July meeting within the comprehensive plan. On the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, as I noted, this is our #1 priority. The two key provisions in this bill were modeled after Connecticut. This is $27 billion underneath the IRA, the single largest investment in climate justice in this country. One element, the Solar for All program, I call it the Sanders 7. This is a Bernie Sanders aspect of the bill, $7 billion for up to 60 recipients, most likely states and territories and tribes, specifically for solar. So our RES program, our Shared Clean Energy Facilities program, with associated storage, so our Energy Storage Solutions program, and any associated upgrades like roof replacements, electric panels, those sorts of things. So Solar for All. The National Clean Investment Fund, $14 billion, will be 2 to 3 national nonprofits selected to essentially serve as a national climate bank. We're currently working with the Coalition for Green Capital, which is, you all may know, over the last decade has been leading the charge on this national source of funding for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And then the Clean Communities Investment Accelerator, $6 billion, open to 2 to 7 hub nonprofits that would provide $5 to $6 million a year to community lenders, of which, for example, the Connecticut Green Bank would be one, as would Capital for Change, as could Connecticut Housing Finance Authority and other community lenders that we all have been working with over the years. So really exciting things happening. The NOFO, Notice of Funding Opportunity, we think will be released in July. We thought it would have been released by now, but we think it will be released now in the early part of July. We've been heavily involved in this. These are just a few links to some of the recent comments we made last week. But if folks want to find out any information on how we've been engaged with the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, we've got this website here with all of our documents, all of our verbal testimony, everything that we've been involved in with our state colleagues. We've got a really great Connecticut consortium on Solar for All. DEEP, PURA, Department of Housing, CHAFA, Department of Banking is willing to engage our local Community Reinvestment Act financial institutions. So we're pulling together lots of great parties to help us. And looking forward, to community engagement this summer to help us further flesh out these proposals. So that's where the Green Bank is on our planning process and our priority, our federal priority. Happy to take any questions.
Brian, can you talk a little bit about the commitment to low and moderate income communities and disadvantaged communities as a mission of the Green Bank?
Excellent. So as a result of many things over the years, one of the things I didn't mention as we closed out the residential solar investment program is that Connecticut was the leading, most effective, efficient, and equitable in the entire Northeast, including New York and New Jersey, in terms of watts per capita deployed in residential, the least incentive cost on a solar rec basis, and the most equitable in terms of reaching less than 80% area median income households. Connecticut is known as a solar with justice state. That's why Senator Sanders' team reached out to us several years ago. So it's been a gradual evolution and commitment. In 2020, we all recall Public Act 2005, colloquially known as the Take Back Our Grid Act. One provision in that act created a definition for vulnerable communities. We worked with DEEP on that specific definition around Community Reinvestment Act eligible communities. CRA is a federal policy passed in 1977 that requires FDIC insured financial institutions to invest in less than 80% area median income communities. Our goal as a green bank is to unlock banking investment in our communities, which we have been doing. So we took that definition into our 2021 process with our board. In January of 2021, we make a mid-year comprehensive plan budget target revision. And one recommendation was that the Green Bank include in its comprehensive plan no less than 40% of investment in benefits from its financing and incentive programs to vulnerable communities. The board was very supportive of that. We measure ourselves on that. We track our performance on that. Staff is tracked on achieving those targets. So we have lots of maps, lots of data that we collect that demonstrates our progress towards it. The vulnerable communities definition by the state has a number of different things within it, like the environmental justice provision, Connecticut General Statutes 22A-20A, which includes DECD distressed, as well as federal poverty level areas. It includes low to moderate income, less than 100% AMI census tracts, which is all good, but we try to focus on it at the Green Bank less than 80% because our goal is to use a limited amount of public resources to mobilize private investment. So we want to get those commercial banks off the sidelines and investing in our low-income communities. And with looking ahead, I'm really optimistic because Commissioner Perez at the Department of Banking is a big CRA advocate. They've been commenting into the federal government, the OCC, the FDIC, and the Federal Reserve, stating that Connecticut has ambitious climate policies. They want the federal government to acknowledge that underneath CRA, financial institutions funding climate resilience and mitigation projects should be eligible projects. So we have a really big proponent in Commissioner Perez and his team. So we're very committed to Justice 40, equity. You know, as we talk about here with our team, you can't have environmentalism without humanitarianism. It just doesn't work. We need to support our most vulnerable in order to get at the environmental problems that we're after. So yeah, happy to share any information on that. Our team's very committed to it.
Thank you, Brian. Are there any questions or comments for Brian? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and move on to an update on the CNLM plan.
Good afternoon, it's Stacey Sherwood. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you, Brenda. So I serve as the lead technical consultant on behalf of the Energy Efficiency Board. So I'm just going to provide a brief update today. I will say I have more to talk about at the September meeting, joint committee meeting, than we will now. We're kind of in a transition period. So as we noted in the December meeting, they filed their 2023 plan update, as well as the 2023 program savings document manual, also known as the PSD, on November 1. And then they also filed updated plans to reflect budgetary changes by March 1 of 2023. So currently we are awaiting the draft determination and any conditions of approval from DEEP on the 2023 plan update that was filed, as well as responses to conditions of approval that were issued last year by DEEP related to the 2022 plan. Both of these, so the draft conditions and reflections on the conditions of approval and responses, are expected to be released by DEEP this week. In addition to the regulatory approval of the CNLM, we do anticipate that the CNLM itself will assist with the implementation of federal rebate funding in Connecticut. So we are awaiting the guidance from DOE and subsequently DEEP on the direction to take with those. Next Wednesday, on June 28th, we are going to have our annual planning meeting for the Energy Efficiency Board. It will be held actually at a net zero school in Manchester, Connecticut. So I think that was maybe the one you were referencing there, Brian. And during that meeting, we will be discussing these following items. So the EEB's DEI consultants will be providing their recommendations for the residential and C&I equity performance management incentives for 2024. The board will vote on those in August for adoption. We're going to be exploring how any changes in how we view equity within the plans may impact funding distribution in an effort to address underserved communities. We're also going to have the utilities highlighting some changes they have planned for their 2024 plan update. And we will be providing an overview of the redevelopment of the community and statewide dashboards. This is where the companies provide information on the CNLM program achievements. So that's going to be getting revised over the next year or so. We're also going to be discussing workforce development and education programs and potential changes that may need to be made going forward, not only in reaction to a condition of approval from DEEP, but also from findings in the evaluations that are completed for the board. And we're also going to be reviewing draft determination for 2023 plan. So as I indicated, there's a lot of materials that are going to be covered for the annual planning meeting, but in particular, one of the first times we're going to be hearing something at the board level or on the 2024 plan update will be next Wednesday. So on the next slide, Brian, I'm just going to kind of walk through the schedule for that 2024 plan update. Can you go to the next slide, Brian?
There we go. Sorry about that.
Thank you. I didn't have these written down on any notes, so I was just going to go through. Oh, one more.
Forgive me.
That's okay.
Computer lag. End user error. All right, there we go. How's that?
Perfect. Thank you. So this month, the technical consultants and board leadership have been working with the companies to develop this timeline that I'm presenting to you. We're going to develop, the companies are going to be developing their plan update outline. So this includes for the text and the drafting of budget tables and the PSD. The companies will also have their deadline for evaluation inclusion in 2024 PSD. So that will be coming from the evaluation administrator team. In July, we do not have an energy efficiency board meeting for residential committee, C&I committee, and the board meeting for that month. Evaluation committee will still be meeting. But during that time, we're still going to be working, and the companies will be working on their initial drafts of the plan update, including the text and the budget savings tables, and be working with the board and the consultants to develop any feedback and edits that we may have on those drafts. In August, we'll resume the board meeting. So 1 week prior to the board meeting, the companies will distribute the draft and budget savings tables to the EEB and make those public. And then at the August 9th EEB meeting, we'll be discussing those budgeted savings tables. During that month, the companies will also be integrating any edits that they receive on these documents to then lead into the September board meeting. At September 6th, they're going to distribute the draft plan update text and the finalized budget and savings tables to the board to be discussed at the September 13th board meeting. And the board will also vote on the budget and savings tables. And then in October, the final documents will be provided to the board 1 week prior to the October 11th EEB meeting. And at that point, board members will vote to adopt not only the plan text and as well as the budget and savings tables, so that those documents will be filed on November 1. One of the things that's not highlighted on this slide are the public input sessions that we typically hold. We're currently working on when those will be held, but the board plans to hold joint public input sessions as it has in the past with DEEP in August and September, and the announcements of the dates and times for those public input sessions on the plan are forthcoming. Any questions?
So, one question, Stacy. Has there been any movement in incorporating water efficiency into the energy efficiency plan or program?
In terms of measures, or in what way, Brenda?
Reduction measures as water rates continue to trend and become a bit more, less affordable, especially for low and moderate income customers. I know that there was a push many, many years ago to include water efficiency measures into the weatherization program. It just never made it very far. And when I was a member of the board, the EEB, it was something that I was hoping to see happen.
I'm gonna call on Ron if he's still on to see if he has any input there. Sorry, Ron.
Quite all right. I kind of anticipated that you were going to call on me on this one. And Brenda, you and I have talked about this in the past. With respect to the water conservation measures, presently we're only offering the water conservation measures that save energy. So it's pretty much what you were familiar with, Brenda, with the low flow faucet aerators, shower heads, things of that nature. We have not moved beyond that in any way, shape, or form. We have expanded that to the commercial industrial side, but with respect to measures that save only water but no energy, we have not adopted that. And that also creates, I know, has created some problems, which is one of the issues way back when we looked at this, was the fact that it does create inequities because not everybody is getting water service from a water company. That there isn't a fund that these water companies have, and then what do you do with the folks who are on well water from a funding perspective? So I think it's a policy item that would need to be addressed, and how is this going to be funded? Much like what was wrestled with oil measures until a funding mechanism was identified for oil.
Thanks, Ron. I'll that's something that I've abandoned a bit as a result of just lack of time, but would love to revisit that, and maybe you and I can sit down and have a conversation about that.
Sure, I'd be more than happy to, and I could certainly bring in someone from our querying group as well as need be.
Awesome, thank you. Are there any other questions or comments for Stacy regarding the CNLM plan and the process? All right, we're going to move right along here, plugging away with the agenda.
Cool. So why don't I set some context, Brenda, in terms of healthy homes I feel like when you became chair of our joint committee following the retirement of Eric Brown, that your healthy homes was your priority area of focus. So we've been taking up conversations, agenda items at the past joint committee meetings. So just a quick overview of where we've been in terms of several meetings last year. We did do an incentive overview, pretty in detailed, Ron, Steve, and the crew digging in there in terms of the CL&M programs, the EDC administration of RES, Residential Renewable Energy Solutions, and SCEF, Shared Clean Energy Facilities, and our co-administration of energy storage solutions. So we provided those incentive overviews. We also began to dive into federal incentives as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act. We'll talk a little bit about some other incentives today, or tax credits, but we were looking at the energy efficiency tax credits, the renewable energy tax credits as examples, some of the rebates, which I think we were talking about a little bit earlier there. And then we're really excited by all the adders that are in the Inflation Reduction Act. So we provided that overview at the time. So things have been changing, and we'll have our team provide an update on some of those things in a second. And then this notion of working collectively together to navigate the incentive maze to try to make the journey of the customer from where they are today to a full solution, 100% zero carbon solution for them that includes efficiency and renewable energy, and having our respective teams help us try to get that journey simplified, and prioritizing affordable housing in some of that context, at least with some of the interagency work. So that's just a high level quick overview of where we've been. And I know we had a number of questions that are ongoing, and I'll just turn it back over to you, Brenda, to dig into that, and would invite anybody to answer any and all of these questions, whether you're with the EDCs, the Green Bank, the public, the EEB board, the Green Bank board. Feel free to jump in here, but Brenda, let me turn it over to you.
Thanks, Brian. Yes, healthy homes are critically important, as it's also a way to push back on poverty. Energy efficiency measures are excellent ways to support good physical and mental health. Creating healthy indoor living environments for people who are struggling with poverty issues tend to also struggle with health, and having healthy air temperatures, humidity levels at reasonable rates, and as well as noise and levels and improved air quality. All of these things are very important. I wanted to kind of connect the LIHEAP piece to this because I feel like there's that program is being underutilized with respects to the HESIE program. So Connecticut receives on average between $80 to $100 million from the federal government to provide heating for customers who are at 60% of state median income and below. None of those dollars are used for cooling, and about 4% of the overall funding is used for HESIE, when states actually have the flexibility to request up to 25% of those dollars to be used for weatherization measures. What can we do as a subcommittee to help promote the state's plan to increase the allocation from that direct bill payment assistance for heating and utilize more resources for the weatherization effort in our state? I know that there are many homes that need weatherization, and I believe that, again, that piece is being underutilized regarding the federal funds. I know that there was also some issues with the cooling program that was supposed to be administered over the last year, perhaps even the last 2 years, which never got off the ground. And cooling in the summer is more critical to one's health than I would say lacking heat in the winter. I know that's an unpopular statement, but you know, you can live uncomfortably in a home without heat. But if you're living in a home without cooling and the temperatures rise and you happen to have a heart condition or respiratory condition, or if you're vulnerable in terms of, you know, your age, if you're under 6 or if you're elderly, we can see a lot of people perish in the summertime. So I just wanted to put that out there as a question, and as along with it being kind of commentary. How do we help bring more weatherization via the LIHEAP funding source? And I think that there are quite a few people who are not even aware of LIHEAP coming into the state on an annual basis to help people with their heating. So I wanted to bring it here to this group to bring more awareness, as we spoke about education and awareness building earlier per Hank's comments about legislation and how to promote good policy. I think it would be good policy for the state of Connecticut to increase its allocation from 4% for weatherization measures to at least 10. If we can get that going, I'm a little baffled as to why out of all of the New England states, Connecticut is only using about 4% of its allocation of LIHEAP for weatherization. Other New England states average up to 15%. Melissa, I see you've unmuted.
Yeah, I completely support this. I don't know with this particular committee, like how we can advocate to make that happen. My understanding is that the LIHEAP money that's used for weatherization is not utilized by HSIE, but in some other way through another, program that's like that would be an addition to WAP or HSIE, which I think makes it somewhat more difficult. I don't know if there is a pathway to braid that funding into existing programs. I think that would be the easiest way to do it. Ron, did you have a particular comment to that?
Yeah, I think, and I just want to make sure we're clear here. I think what you were referring to was the REPS program, Melissa. I guess I want to get confirmation when you said the LIHEAP funding that was being used for the health and safety barrier remediation program that DEEP put together called REPS. Is that what you were referring to?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that that's the way that we're currently using it, and it's not directly through the utilities, but you are stepping in to help administer it a little bit.
Right, and that's correct, because we're not receiving any direct funding from LIHEAP for HSIE. The closest we come would be, I guess, would be with the weatherization assistance program. We do cost sharing on some measures with that program, which is another federal funding program. But I just wanted to add to what you were saying. So.
Yeah, so my understanding, I mean, REPS obviously is it's a completely separate program that's administered by DEEP, and then the utilities help out, and there's braiding and cost sharing. So I guess this isn't really our charge, but I think that it would be great if it were able, this funding, if it were utilized, was able to braid with existing programs instead of having to stand up a whole other program and have to get another service provider involved. And yeah, that's my first comment. Is anybody else? I have other comments.
No, keep it going.
Okay. Another thing I was thinking about as you were talking is that cooling alone is not might not solve an issue. I mean, cooling does help, but for instance, in the Portland heat dome effect, or whatever it was called, the heat dome, that there were a number of fatalities of people that did have air conditioning. And so I've been thinking is there a way to incentivize passive cooling measures like shading, um, and shading is one of the kind of passive ways to reduce heat stress for people in housing. And I attended some sessions at the Living Future conference about from heat stress kind of studies that were done in DC and Boston, and kind of citing some of these kind of, you can see how much heat stress is reduced by using some of these other passive strategies that will also save energy.
That's a good question. Given that Hank just provided the update on SB 979, the tree canopy piece successfully making its way through the session. Hank, are you able to provide any context as to what that would look like once it's implemented as law?
I think I can a little bit on the tree canopy piece. Essentially, I think that's going to be identifying, or if there are already places identified where the tree cover would have the most impact on cooling. I think Melissa's talking about more inside the housing unit, which is another way to also provide shading. But just on the tree canopy piece, I think that there will be an effort to identify and implement tree canopy within affected areas. On the broader discussion of why we are or aren't using the different funds for different programs. I personally need to get more familiar with the EEB history and what's going on to be able to provide any kind of meaningful comment. But I hope to as I gain more time in this role. So I just didn't want to leave that all out there without responding.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've had conversations with Vicki about this, and it's Vicki Hackett, and it seemed like that it needed to be like there would need to be an RFP for a service provider, just because these funds are coming from different sources and federal, requirements are different from. But I think that we're making a lot of headway with WAP, knowing that all that money is coming down, with braiding this funding and making, these funding sources, cross program and, cross platform. So I'm hoping that they're, if I think that using this LIHEAP money is a great opportunity, and I'd love to see it happen in a way that doesn't, create more bureaucracy, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know how we accomplish that. It's been a bit of a challenge. I think one of the successes that came out of the pandemic was the barrier removal program. That was a pilot, I believe, funded at 12 million. Do we happen to know how that program is going? If ICAST, the program operator, is achieving their goals? Because I think that would help us understand how we can kind of piggyback off of that to encourage the use of LIHEAP funds for weatherization. And pardon me for connecting it with HESIE, but does anyone on a call can provide any perspective on that pilot?
We've been getting updates about it. It seems like it's running along. The pilot's already done, so they're actually implementing now. I think one of the stumbling blocks has been that it started as a single family owner occupied program, and now they're kind of branching out and trying to engage more multifamily properties. I think they have like 133 projects that are like in the works. So yeah,
Okay.
they're rolling. They're definitely rolling out. Actually, Ron would probably know better than me, because the utilities have really been integral in making sure that this program rolls out.
Yeah, I actually don't have the facts and figures in front of me on this one. but I do know that they have transitioned, and I believe it was just within the last month that they actually fully launched this and are moving forward with it now. And they have gone through and I believe completed the remediation of about a half dozen projects, but with more still in action. But someone from the deep staff would be better able to provide specifics on that.
I could make sure that this is an item, or if, if the powers that be decide we could have an update on this on the next call, just so it'll have more months under its belt, and we can make sure that the appropriate staff is there, if that would help.
Yes, that would totally help. Thank you. The other piece that we've left sort of pending for quite some time now is defining healthy housing. With Melissa on a call who works in buildings, I'm thinking perhaps you can help us get started with a definition of what that would mean for us, so that we can understand how we should prioritize programs and resources to ensure that we're working towards that goal of healthy housing for all.
Yeah, that's a big discussion. I was wondering if there was already a definition somewhere that we could piggyback on, or at least use as a starting point. My definition, I mean, my definition of health is that, it supports full human well-being, not just the absence of disease. So it's very broad.
Right.
So I think we would have to really think about, do we want it to be super specific, about air quality, about, exposure to toxins, what are we focused on, or is it just remediating hazardous material? Is it also, when Healthy Homes programs also address kind of dangerous conditions, and so is this definition something you're seeing that's particular to energy efficiency or energy burden, or very, very broad?
I think if we can focus on the energy efficiency impacts as well as the energy burden impacts, those two, through the lens of those two items, I think would be very important. It can get to a point where it's so broad it's hard to define. So if we just focus on efficiency and burden, I think that would help us kind of narrow the definition.
Yeah, I mean, for me, there's, healthy air is the most important thing. We just dealt with this wildfire issue, and everybody was saying to tell people to, stay inside, and, you need to mask up when you're outdoors. That was something that was missing from some alerts. But what didn't get out there as much was indoor air quality and filtering your indoor air. Which is equally important, because even though you're getting exposed at a lower quantity, it still was exceeding the healthy levels indoors, and you're getting that exposure for longer periods of time. So you're getting even though let's say you spend 20 minutes outside per day and you get that really high exposure, with the lower exposures indoors, you're actually getting a greater exposure over time, because it's for a longer period of time, even though it's a lower quantity. So indoor air filtration is one of my passions. And if you can see, I've got my DIY air filter in my office. So for me, when you start talking about weatherization, for me, it's an opportunity to add in some air ventilation, filtered ventilation.
Yeah, and imagine the folks who had to keep their windows open because they didn't have, air conditioning or even fans. I want to be aware of the time. We're at 2:43 now, and I'd like for Brian to kind of help us understand how the Inflation Reduction Act can help us with this ongoing discussion around healthy housing and what programs organizations on this call and others can think about pursuing to help with that.
Great, thank you, Brenda. So I've got Alex. Alex, I think you're on the line, huh? To provide a high-level overview of some of the things we've been working on. Can I turn it over to you?
Sure, yeah, hi, this is Alex Kofanenko, Deputy General Counsel. And I'm just going to try to go quick. I know there's more on the agenda, probably 5 minutes, and summarize what I think are the kind of key updates to the from the IRA and the ITC that could benefit multifamily and affordable housing. And so the Section 48 ITC, that's the federal tax credit that makes solar development and third-party owned solar viable. And it's been obviously reset to the 30% level by the IRA, but it's also has these new adders now where projects can qualify for the maximum is actually technically you could have a project that's a 70% ITC, and I'll go through how that works. But and the ITC has also now been previously was just for business taxpayers. It's now been expanded with a direct pay option for state and local governments as well as nonprofits to take advantage of that. So you could have a municipality that owns its own solar panel, or a nonprofit that owns it and gets a check from the IRS for that tax credit amount. So that's a new concept from the IRA. So the adders that you can get, this is on top of the 30%. Oh, and the 30%, I should add, so project above 1 megawatt now have a labor requirement, meaning there's apprenticeship and prevailing wage requirements that have to be met for the project to even get the baseline 30% credit. So that's a positive change for big projects as well. The adders now, we have energy communities, this is a 10% adder, and in Connecticut, it's basically 3 categories. You have coal-fired power plant closures, which we have only 2 in Connecticut that could qualify, and there are no more in Connecticut. So this will be it. It's the one in Bridgeport and the one in there over by Norwich in New London. I forget exactly what it is. And so that's one category that could get you the 10% being in those census tracts. The other is having a municipal statistical area. It's kind of technical how it qualifies, but the takeaway is that Fairfield County just got qualified last week. So any projects placed in service from the beginning of this year until May of next year, sometime in May of 2024 in Fairfield County will be eligible for 10% adder. That may change in May of 2024. Every year, beginning in May, they will rerun those numbers to see if those MSA qualifications are met. So that's a time-sensitive one. The coal power plant closures is not. The other one is also brownfield, which is not on this map because it's more site-specific, and you have to basically either demonstrate a brownfield by listing on one of the EPA's list of brownfields or a phase 1 or phase 2 study. So that's how you can achieve 10%. You can achieve another 10% by using domestic content requirements, and that has a slew of its own rules. And also IRS is right now in the process of having issued initial guidance on all of these adders and rules, and they're still, they're subject to finalization and potentially more regulations, but they're sort of setting the initial rules of the road, at least for this first tax year under the IRA. And the last adder, which is really applicable to affordable multifamily housing, is you can potentially get another 10 or 20% adder. And this adder you actually have to apply for, and there's an allocation of 1.8 gigawatts each year, and you have to apply and receive that allocation from the IRS and put the project in service within 4 years of that allocation. The rules for that application, so the first application process for that will be sometime in the end of I believe in the 3rd quarter of this year. The IRS currently has out to comment the rules around getting that adder. And that will be obviously finalized before the third round, before the third quarter of the year for the applications. And that you can get a 10% if you're in a low income community. And you can see that on the map, the low income community, the census tracts, or the 20% is more of, you have to actually qualify as a low income residential building project. And that's where there's a test to share financial benefit equitably with the tenants. So it's very similar, in some ways similar to the RRES requirement, and the way that you can access state incentives at the residential rate for those multifamily projects. There's having to meet a equitable sharing of revenues with the tenants. It's a similar concept here. So we're tracking what those rules will be and how they integrate within the Connecticut framework of the RRES program, and how those projects can move forward. And hopefully we can, I know we will be pursuing at least a couple of projects in the first year of trying to get these additional adders, but it's all under initial guidance now from the IRS. If you have specific questions, you can reach out and I can help point you in the right direction. But there's obviously a lot more nuance in the details here, but the exciting news is that these adders are available. The Fairfield County one is locked in, and these low income community ones will be available in the third quarter for application.
Great. Alex, thank you for that. So just a high level point, and then I want to turn it to Mackie to bring it into more Connecticut context. This is part of the dream big. You know, our team was really excited to see a number of things in the IRA. So you can see how we're digging into these certain areas that are very Justice 40 focused, vulnerable community focused, and our team's coming up the learning curve probably more so than other states in terms of recognizing where these opportunities are going to exist. So you've got federal incentives more coming in. The question then comes, okay, how do we now bring it into state opportunities given our incentive structure? And let me turn it to Mackie to just do a quick affordable housing, what we're working on with other agencies.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mackie Dykes with the Connecticut Green Bank. As Brian referenced, we've been working with DEEP, CHAFA, and DOH on providing recommendations to PURA, that PURA asked for, regarding the implementation of affordable housing participating in the residential solar program. This provides a higher incentive to properties and allows for, or requires that a certain percentage of the benefits from the project be shared with tenants. I think one of the things most relevant for this group, which is efficiency related, is in the case of master metered properties where you don't have the benefit of having an electric bill for each tenant for the utility to put the credit for the solar. It's master metered, you've got one bill, so how do you get the benefits to tenants? The working group that I referenced earlier just provided a recommendation to PURA that the form of those tenant benefits for master metered properties would be improvements, or taking that tenant portion and using it to finance improvements to the property, primarily energy efficiency related ones. So, think heat pumps or lighting, or, I mean, you all know what energy efficiency is, I'll tell you. So, this could open up a great avenue for really providing a big update to these properties. We're getting solar on them, and then using that expected 20-year revenue that the tenants would get from that solar to make immediate improvements to the property.
Okay, thanks, Mackie. Again, looking at the clock here, we should probably keep going with the agenda. Going to move on to other business, which includes the Clean Energy Jobs Report. Brian, are you going to provide us with an update?
Yes, let me do that. So let me just start at a high level. Thank you with our utility partners. We've now published our third year of the Clean Energy Industry Report in Connecticut. Just to give some background, we started this in 2020 within the Joint Committee as an effort between DEEP, the utilities, and the Green Bank. There is a group called BW Research Partnerships that works with the Department of Energy on their USER report, the United States Energy Employment Report, which is the widely held report on energy jobs. What we did in our first go round on the study is say, okay, the federal energy jobs report is great, but we need to decarbonize it to Connecticut and align our policies and track our policies to it. So we developed the methodology with BW Research to track the jobs for us that matter, which are really, decarbonization, less fossil fuel jobs in this context. So that's just generally foundational. So we published the 2022 report recently in the spring, issued a press release. It's very backward looking. So I think the data here is 2021. Let me see if I could pull up these slides here as my system lags. So it's backward looking. You can see the impacts of COVID in 2020 and then the rebound in 2021. We think that the data for 2022 is out, so we'll be working with BW Research to update these data and analyses for 2022. Broadly, I just pulled a few sections from this report. We have a lot of work to do in terms of ensuring diversity in our workforce. We're slowly making progress. We need to do a lot more in terms of Hispanic and Black in the workforce and a number of other things. So we track some of these data points in the report. But one of the things that has come up recently, and just, Melissa, last time at our December Joint Committee meeting, and then Adrian Ferraruel, who is on the Green Bank's Board of Directors, raised at a recent deployment committee meeting was, looking back is great, but future orientation is better. Like, how are we thinking about planning the needs of the workforce given our public policies on carbon reduction? So I kind of think of this as like, Hank, if we had our 45% reduction in 2001 levels by 2030 staring at us, and all the 2030 policy targets on weatherization, zero emission school buses, light duty vehicles, all those things. If we had all those, where are we today in terms of the workforce, and where do we need to be in 2030 to start planning and getting there? So one of the things we were provided by BW Research was an example agreement between a state and them to do a workforce needs assessment. And one of the things that Philip recommended specific to those 6 tasks were 3 specific areas. An assessment of the current workforce, which has a number of different things. Where are we today? Where do we need to be? The future projected workforce analysis, and then best practice examples out there. Happy to share that within our group for folks to take a look at. But I think it begs the question of, in addition to looking back as we're doing in the utilities, we've been great. Like, our teams are just every year knocking these things out. But what can we do looking forward in terms of those policies? Hank, I feel like this might be a conversation too with Deputy Commissioner Hodeling and the Clean Economy Council. Like, there might, and there may be things already in the works, but I think the point Melissa and Adrian are raising is, and I know that this is one of the things that keeps me up at night, is I feel like Connecticut's got all the right policies and incentives in place, and the federal government is now a partner. We're going to create a lot of demand. And if we don't have the supply of workforce to support the demand, then we're not going to achieve our 2030 target. So kind of where do we stand in terms of planning for that workforce, a diverse workforce, equitable, just, all those things, so that we can get from here to there. So I'm just kind of putting this in front of the joint committee from, 2 members of our respective boards to say that we should consider this and, get your all's feedback on it. And, happy to then work with our utility colleagues to figure out a path forward if there isn't one that already exists.
Yeah, Brian, I mean, this is one of the issues I think vexing a lot of a lot of states right now, especially with the welcome federal investments. And I do think a first step, yeah, should be like sussing it out with Kelly Marie over at OWS and the CCEC, because I know that there's also discussions over there on the same identification of this needs assessment and the study. And I was also sitting next to one of our counterparts in Massachusetts last week, and he said that they're about to have a workforce study be published, and so we might be able to glean a little bit of insights on that and make sure that it all makes sense. So, but I think this is an area that is well identified for need.
I suspect, Hank, that it's this project because this project goes back to last year.
Yeah.
So I'll send you the proposal. Yeah. Cool.
Hi, this is Melissa. Thanks. Yeah, this is great. I think that one other element that needs to be identified is that the funding can support that workforce, because we're in a situation now with just the ebb and flow of energy efficiency funding, that there's hiring freeze, and some contractors potentially might lay off some of their workforce. So I think that the funding has to be hand in hand with the energy efficiency goals. So I don't know how to work that in here, but I think that's super important.
Melissa, this is Ron from Eversource. Thank you for saying that, because that was the point that I was going to bring up, is that one of the pitfalls that we had when we had the ERA funding, for those who remember that, it was like boom and bust, because it was a very short duration, a lot of new hires, and then the funding went away and the jobs essentially went away. And I think, what we really want to do is create something that's sustainable here for the long term, and that has consistent funding on a long-term basis, so that way we don't create that boom and bust. So thank you for bringing that up.
Okay, any other comments or questions about the clean energy industry report? Okay, so we're at the 3 o'clock time. Do we end at 3 or 3:30, Brian? The agenda says 3.
That's right. But we're almost done.
Yep. Let's go through the heat pump assessment.
All right. I think John is still on. Let me try to set it up, John Harity. At our Budget Operations and Compensation Committee meeting, we were discussing the Green Bank's research and development budget. So every year, as part of our budget process, we have resources to support things on the horizon, things that we need to understand, ways for us to think about how we can draw more private investment in clean energy and environmental infrastructure. And one of the questions that John raised was, what's the status of heat pumps? They're very, very expensive. Should we be thinking about a joint study with the EEB? How should we be thinking about heat pumps in terms of this kind of market assessment? Having come from the NEEP conference last week, I was told by several people there that there are a lot of studies. I feel like we need to get those studies, like maybe a synthesis of those studies, or consider a study. But John, anything else you want to add there? Forgive me for not being as articulate as you were at the budget.
No. There's no case in which you are not as articulate as me. That's for sure. I really just the my thinking was that this is an incredibly expensive item, the ground heat pump, and that it would be great if some knowledgeable people could kind of take a look at what are the costs that go into that and figure out if there is any way to cut those costs, to do it in a less expensive way. There's sometimes we get we do things in a very high technology way when we don't need to, or it just hasn't been looked at. So it's not necessarily I mean it's just a desire to look at this super expensive item and see whether or not it needs to be as incredibly as expensive as it is, because home heating, especially in New England, is so tied to fossil fuels that it's going to be a long time before we get ground heat pumps into a lot of homes at the cost that it is. I know a number of years ago, I was working with someone who had a technology they thought that would be useful, and we hired CCAT to do an analysis of the technology, looking at it from a more objective point of view, and then issued a report. And so that was all. It may not be useful, but it just seems to me that it's a crazy expensive item.
I would agree with you, John. It can cost around $10,000 and then another 10 for labor. So when we're talking about trying to scale the install of heat pumps, that's going to require a commitment from the state to help people get there. So I think a study is a good idea to understand.
What do you think, Ron, about maybe next meeting doing a section on like an overview on heat pumps? There's a part of me that wants to say, can we collect them from NEEP and then try to synthesize them in an email? But I think that might still be complicated, given the need to reduce hard costs and soft costs.
And before Ron answers that, I just want to note that some states are using their LIHEAP funding to install heat pumps in their home system repair and replacement programs.
I like that idea, Brenda.
Yep, so do I.
Yeah. Brian, I think your suggestion's a good one, because I think one of the things we can do is we can do some ground setting on, the heat pump technologies that are available out there. We can provide some insight to what we're seeing happening in the market, some of the challenges there, and provide some cost ranges for whether it's a ductless air source heat pump, whether it's a ducted air source heat pump, whether it's a variable refrigerant flow heat pump or ground source heat pump, like the one I think John was referring to. So I think that would be, a good overview of what we're seeing out there for the technology, as well as the successful applications.
I feel like, Ron, we had a great presentation from the Eversource subcontracting team on heat pumps at the Green Bank. Like, what are they? As you were listing all that stuff there, it felt like that was the presentation. I will check to see if we recorded it, and in the least, just send that to this group if folks want to listen to that. And then why don't we think about the next meeting, synthesizing, like to your point, that down a bit.
Okay. I think that's great.
Cool.
This is Melissa. I think one of the things that John was getting at that could be really useful is just thinking about ways to reduce the cost. Like, for instance, the first thing that comes to my mind is bulk purchasing. Like, how is there a way for these programs to bulk purchase these systems and reduce the cost? That's the only thing that comes to me right now. But like maybe there are other things that we can do as, you know, these larger programs that do all these installations to, you know, make it more efficient.
Back in the day, Melissa, the DOE had a Sunshot initiative, which was about solar, and it was about trying to reduce hard costs and soft costs. And it would award, to states. We want a number of them, and we focused in on permitting. Our 169 cities and towns, they all have different permitting processes, and we tried to get the standardization that would reduce the soft costs there. And now solar is, so cheap that it's just economic. I wonder if there's Ron, like a DOE Earthshot or something on heat pumps. I know the secretary talks about them all the time. So I can't imagine that there's not a program to try to reduce the hard costs, as Melissa's suggesting, with procurement versus the soft cost on the other side with permits, labor, whatever all those soft costs are.
Yeah, I'd want to check with our channel team just to see what they're seeing from a larger, regional perspective. I know as recent as last year, we're running into a lot of supply chain issues with just trying to meet demand, and the unfortunate part of that is that the solution there tends to always be, well, it costs more to get more produced, and I think that's exactly what we're trying to avoid. So I would need to do some checking with them, because they have greater insight into the manufacturers and the distribution channels, and can probably provide some greater insight.
Awesome. Thanks, Ron.
Yeah, I would think that like if we had a statewide kind of bulk purchasing program, that we would be able to give the manufacturers the kind of green light that, if you increase your production, you're going to get, that people are going to buy it. So I think that I think it could be potentially a solution to the supply chain issue.
Yeah, well, and Melissa, just to that point, I mean, there are a couple of ways. One is that there's certainly the bulk purchase, but then there's also there's also you can commit to purchasing a certain amount, so that way you're not necessarily buying in warehousing heat pumps somewhere, because that also adds cost.
All right, I think this is great. I think, Ron, we've got some guidance to take back, and then we can come back next meeting with some follow-up. Thank you, Brenda.
Yep, thank you. All right, moving on to other business. Actually, our public comments. Oh, other business. Public comments. Are there any members of the public who would like to weigh in at this time? Okay, hearing none, I will go ahead and adjourn the meeting. It's 3:11. I want to thank you all. Thank you, Brian. Nice to meet you, Hank, and others of the committee. Thank you for joining today.
Hey, Brenda,
Yes,
I just want to raise 2 points and
sure.
for looking at yesterday or today in the Connecticut Mirror, there were 2 articles that were of great concern. One was that it looks like the offshore wind purchases are on the verge of falling apart for a variety of reasons. The other was that the solar farm in East Windsor is encountering opposition because apparently it makes some sort of strange noise that's really irritating to the people that live around it. And I think we need to be looking at these things. It just kind of made my heart sink to see, like on one screen, 2 really big initiatives that were in trouble all of a sudden. I know we don't have time today, but I just wanted to raise it for people to be thinking about. Thanks.
I think that's an important issue, John, because there are a number of groups who are backed by the fossil fuel industry that are opposing wind power, both on and offshore, along with solar installations. So I think it's definitely something we should pay attention to, because it really is about the disinformation of clean energy that's making its way into the hearts and minds of people who you would not ever think would subscribe to these ideas. People who love the environment, and it really is it is a huge issue. So thank you for flagging that. All right, at this point, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you all again.
Take care, folks.
Bye.
Bye.